themselves. Men are literally getting weaker. 400,000 more men would be alive in the US today. That's more than the number of men that died in World War II. The main reason men are committing suicide at these rates, they said, I felt purposeless and I felt useless. But the moment you start enjoying them, it stops growing.
Let's impact some men today. I think we're gonna do a great job.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another podcast. This is the Modern Man Podcast. So glad to have you. And this podcast exists because a lot of men hustle. They hit the goals, they hit the accomplishments, they get the titles, but they still feel unfulfilled, lonely, and empty inside. This is the podcast to help solve that. And if you are listening right now, before we jump into the episode, I first want to say thank you for being here and also encourage you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and share this podcast with somebody else you know can get value from it as well. Join us as we embrace discomfort, cultivate community, and put wind in each other's sails. Now, I'm excited because today we're going to get some wind in our sails from my guest, who is a high-performing athlete, finance professional, and men's advocate, redefining what it means to compete, both in sport and in life. It is a pleasure to have Kirk Kappelhof on the podcast. Kirk, thanks for being on, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. Good to see you, Tim.
Good to see you. And usually I ask for introductions, but I'm getting away from that. I want to just jump right into the value. And one thing I wanted to ask you off the bat was, what did climbing Mount Kilimanjaro teach you about yourself?
Well, I growing up, there was this desire to see cities. Right? To see kind of what man-made creations were out there. When I climbed Kilimanjaro, I got an appetite for adventure. And so now I'm exploring different things. For example, that was a group trip that we had. It was a group of 9 people that we climbed Kilimanjaro with. The next one, I was like, what's another adventure? Well, I've never been scuba certified. I've never been scuba diving before. Mm-hmm. Can we do that? So we went to Honduras, which has some of the best scuba diving in the world, and we did that. The next one I want to do is like a skydiving trip where we all just like go get skydiving certified. Jumping off of a plane with somebody is terrifying. Jumping off of a plane by yourself is probably more terrifying still. Just pushing the limits of this. Like have you heard of the Hajjiang Loop? Mm-mm. The Hajjiang Loop is a motorcycle loop in Vietnam that you can do. You sit on the back of a motorcycle, and it's apparently where James Cameron got the inspiration for Avatar. And so getting on a motorbike and just doing that loop for 4 days would just be like such an adventure. And so this appetite for adventure, doing things in the world that may be a little bit crazy, but thrill-seeking, that's what Kilimanjaro did for me. But also just pushing your limits, right? Like, I will tell you, 5 of the 7 days climbing Kilimanjaro, no problem. It's just a hike.
Yeah.
Summit night was by far the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. You get to the camp at 5 p.m. and you get to sleep for maybe 5 to 6 hours. Then they wake you up at 11 p.m. So you're sleep deprived. You're at the highest altitude that you've been at, so you have altitude sickness. It's pitch black, so you can't see a thing. And you know that for the next 7 hours until 6 a.m., you're walking up a hill like this. And I can't even describe how slow you're going. You wouldn't even believe me, but you can't breathe. And so you take your balaclava off to breathe, but then you get too cold, so you put it back on. And for 7 hours, you're just agitated, irritable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you combust into crying half the time. We had several people who were like hallucinating. It was a wild experience. I recommend people do it, especially with the company we went with, Mizafari Tanzania. They were incredible. But pushing your limits, something I've always been about. It's actually something I've done a lot of research on too, regarding the AMCC. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later today. Yeah. But in general, doing hard things is something I'm a huge advocate of.
Why so early? Like, why are you waking up at 11 p.m. to summit by 6 a.m.?
That's a great point. So when you climb, you're only allowed, you can either stay up there for less than an hour so that you don't acclimatize, or you have to stay there for over a day. And of course you could stay for anything in between, but it's just for your mental health and lack of mental sickness, right? You don't want to stay there for either longer or shorter than that period. The best time to go is sunrise. if you get there and you arrive at like 6, 7 a.m., you just see the whole world open up. They call it the rooftop of Africa. And it looks, you can tell why. You can see everything. You're above the clouds, and the clouds open up and you can see into the towns. It feels like you're in an airplane. Absolutely wild. In fact, while we were at probably the hardest part, right before this false summit known as Stella Point, we looked out and we saw the sun was rising. And as the sun was rising, we saw a comet was actually falling.
Wow.
And we just turned around. It was like almost a sign. It gave us our second win. And for most of us who did that trip, not all of us, we actually got that tattooed on our legs right here on my left leg. I won't show that right now, but
Appreciate that.
but that's how like impactful that was. And so the sunrise is the main reason for the early summit.
You mentioned doing hard things, and there was a study, 2018, Flow and the Foundations of Positive Psychology, and it found that athletes performing under high pressure often enter transient hyperfrontality, or a state where self-doubt shuts off and full focus emerges, explaining the spiritual or transcendent moments athletes experience during long endurance feats, much like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. Do you get that same feeling when you're on wall ball 92 of a high rocks race? A little bit of a transition here, because I know that that's something that we really linked up together on in the community of Manly. Shout out to Manly. High rocks is something I have not done yet, something you've done a few times. I'm curious as to your appetite for adventure. Did that bleed into these endurance challenges? Was that something that you had beforehand? How did that come about?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. I think pushing your body is something that we still have not discovered the length of the benefits of. And Kilimanjaro is one example. Doing a high rocks is another. It doesn't have to be that. Like some people aren't fond of high rocks. Some people aren't fond of CrossFit, but maybe they like cycling, right? Maybe that's how you can push your body. Some people like marathon running. Some people like weightlifting, reaching their maximum level. Whatever that looks like for you, I can imagine that high would be hit. Whether it's on wall ball 92 of the 100 of high rocks, which is ruthless, or it's something else. I think it's beneficial in the long run to do those hard things. In fact, one of the things that I talk about in one of my chapters is the AMCC. And this is something called the Anterior Mid-Cingulate Cortex.
Okay.
So the AMCC is interesting. It's very rare in the brain that we can link a part of the brain to a specific function. For example, we have Broca's area, Wernicke's area for like speaking or interpretation. Those are such well-known areas because we've isolated speech, we've isolated interpretation to those areas in our left hemisphere, right? Occipital lobe controls vision. It's very important when we can isolate. They believe, and this is mainly an Andrew Huberman statement, that they have isolated the section in our brain responsible for willpower. Your AMCC tends to grow and shrink in tandem with your willpower. And what's interesting is that the way you grow and shrink it is by doing hard things. Let me give you the study that he cited for this. They had two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A was told they had to do 5 hours of additional stretching per week. Group B was told they had to do 5 hours of additional cardio per week. Okay, now, as you can imagine, one of those is a lot easier than the other. The stretching sounds a lot more amenable to ourselves than the conditioning. What they found was the people who did the cardio had a higher growth of the AMCC than the people who were doing just the stretching. But what's even more interesting still is that once the people in the cardio group started enjoying the cardio, their AMCC stopped growing. So what they found was this. Your AMCC will grow when you do hard things, but the moment you start enjoying them, it stops growing because now you enjoy it. Now it's not hard anymore.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind. I can't trick my brain into doing hard things if I actually enjoy them. If I enjoy going on a run every day, maybe it's time to switch it up and go to weightlifting, which is something that sounds too grueling. But maybe I'm a weightlifter and I go, you know what? I really should start reading in the mornings instead with my coffee because that's something that I really need to get good at and I'm just not doing it. Your AMCC will grow. And the interesting feedback loop of all of this is that as your AMCC grows, hard things get easier, which make finding hard things harder, which makes hard things easier. It's just a nonstop positive feedback loop. What's scarier still is that people who have small AMCCs are at risk or greater risk of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. So, and this is a tentative claim, doing harder things can reduce your propensity to be depressed, have suicidal ideation, and experience anxiety. That doesn't mean it's a fixed cure for those things, but there's definitely a correlation between the size of it, or a negative correlation between the size of it and those three items.
Yeah, that's amazing, because it isn't necessarily like, hey, do this and you're cured, but I'm a big fan of stacking the chips in my favor.
Sure.
We can control the controllables. I can't control what life does to me, but I can control my conditioning beforehand that will enhance my ability to be calm within the storm, right?
Sure.
And when it comes to voluntarily doing hard things, you mentioned weightlifting and distance running. I come from a weightlifting background. Looking down the barrel of a high rocks race, now I'm like, crap, I got to start running. And the amazing thing was, when I did a 10K recently, I was about at mile 4 and 5. And this was more of the longest I've pushed my body for continuous runs. I've done the 4 or 5 miles, but that was more on the leisure side. Now there's a time I'm trying to beat. I'm pushing myself. I have the headphones in, which Humble, Kendrick Lamar is a great song to run to. But all of a sudden at mile 4 and 5, I'm by the water. There's the radiational fog coming off. It's like 8:30 in the morning. It's a beautiful, crisp fall day. And I'm cruising, Kirk. And I started to have fun. And this is coming from someone who was against running. I'm like, I'm not a runner. I hate running. The only running you're going to see me do is in sports. If I'm chasing a ball, that's it. But here I am on a trail run, enjoying a Saturday morning, 4 or 5 miles deep into a run. Never thought I would say that, but that enjoyment did come.
Wow.
Which shows the neuroplasticity, the adaptability that we have within ourselves. But it does start with first walking up to that starting line, knowing I'm going to do something that I've trained a little bit for and is not necessarily going to be easy. And that last mile 6, was uphill and it was not fun. But I'm curious as to, what do you tell yourself at the base of Mount Kilimanjaro, or at the starting line of a high rocks race? What do you tell yourself before? And what's the self-talk like after?
It's a good question, because on the one hand, you have the negative self-talk that says, you're going to mess this up. You're going to fail. What if you don't make it to the top? What if? All these what if questions that induce anxiety. And on the other end, you think, it doesn't matter whether I make it to the top or finish this high rocks or not, right? It doesn't matter. So why not just give it your best shot? Just give it your absolute best. And so those competing voices in my head, they're constantly there. And not even just for the big things, even for the small things, right? You want to start a business, you want to do a YouTube channel, you want to go do a podcast with a friend. Though there's a bunch of questions in your mind that say, what if it goes wrong? You only have one life, right? And do you really want to look back on your life and say, what if the other way? What if I would have done it? What could have I achieved? And so for me, my kind of general life motto has just been, do it and see how it goes. And if it doesn't stick, walk away.
Yeah.
Right. But for the most part, short of like egregious things, you're not going to be mad at yourself for trying. And people won't be mad at you for trying either.
Yeah.
You know, like we've talked about this before, but you're always going to get pushback when you do something where you're trying hard. There's a typical connotation against the try hard, right? Tryhards are the ones that do something with their life. And if we knew how close we were to that next step, that next level of achieving something, but we were just held back because we cared what Judy down the street thought of us, or our friends from high school that we've never spoken to before, or some guy that, you know, for whatever reason we care about his opinion, but we have no reason to. If we got over the barrier of those, there's this Edison quote that I love. He says, if we did everything we were capable of, we'd literally astonish ourselves. And I try to apply that to my life. If I did everything I was capable of, how shocked could I be at what I could achieve in my friendship group, in my relationships, with my family, in business, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically? What could I achieve out there? Those are the thoughts that ultimately have to reign in your mind if you're going to be happy with your life. You're not going to be happy with the life of, I didn't do it because I was too afraid to try.
Yeah. A lot of people are paralyzed or analysis paralysis, right? They see all the roads they can take. So their default is to not take any. Sure. And stick on the road that they're on. And from the voices of those doubters, from the voices of those who push back really quick, for someone on the outside looking in might think, oh, Kirk, you have success in a career and building financial models, helping startups. Why push anymore, right? There's the complacency that some people have where good becomes the enemy of great. And for anybody on the outside looking in might frame your setup as good enough.
Sure.
And they question, okay, what are you chasing? What is it all for?
A phenomenal question. I was actually talking about this with my partner the other day, and we were trying to find the balance between living a life where you're content, meaning you're grateful for your life, but not so grateful that you don't want to achieve more. And there's a couple of theories on this, right? The Christian theory might be like something along this line. You were made for perfection, so nothing is going to be good enough until you get perfection, right?
Mm-hmm.
A more maybe, let's just say, evolutionary school of thought might be something along the lines of we were designed for efficiency. We were always designed to look for more. And so maybe that's the drive. Either way, if I come back to my core principles, I find a lot of joy in seeing people living in the most of their potential. And what I mean by that is this. A kid might be born and he has, let's call it 20 potential, whatever that hypothetical number means. If he's living at 19, he's doing pretty darn good. He's living at 19 of his 20 potential. Whereas a kid who was born with 80 potential, who's living at 40, sure, he's doing better than the kid who was only born with 20 potential, but he's living at 50% of what he could achieve.
Yeah.
One of the biggest tragedies that I see in life is when you see someone that you know they could achieve so much, and they're too afraid of what their friend might think, or they're too afraid of looking a certain way, or they're too afraid of failing.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I talk about with my friends is redefining failure. Meaning most people think if this doesn't work out, it's a failure. I like the redefinition of failure, which says if I stop trying, it's a failure. And the reason I like that redefinition is because if it doesn't work out, it fails. That's a definition that's not based in my control. If everything worked out the way I wanted it to, things would look a lot different, right? In my life and everyone else's around me. But if I start defining failure as if you stop trying, then you failed, then it's completely in my control.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely up to me how far I go and when I stop. And when I say it's enough, or when I say, there's a little bit more, in me to go. So what ultimately drives this desire to be the best I can be? I wouldn't say it's far-fetched to say that my mom telling me that I can achieve amazing things is a driver.
Yeah.
That makes me want to be that guy. It could be as simple as that.
It's believing in what you can achieve that gives you the audacity to go for it in the first place.
Totally.
And it reminds me of the grounded jet, right? Where the jet doesn't fly because it's afraid it's going to crash, even though it longs to be in the sky. But in the airfield, if you've seen any airfields, there's a guarantee that you will rust and decay.
Wow.
But if you take off, you never touch the sky. Sure, there's a risk of crashing after you take off, but you never touch the sky. I want to talk to a large population that are those fighter jets that are grounded. They're not even on the runway, Kirk. They're hanging out in their mama's basement. They're complacent in a job, staying out the way, enjoying the comforts of the graveyard, which guarantees rust. And I'm talking about a large population of men who just lost those afterburners, and they don't even look at the runway. I know, as you've built yourself, there's become more of that awareness of like, man, like where's the other wolves I'm running with? Where's the other fighter jets that I'm flying with? What opened up your eyes to, I guess, the current situation that we find men in, and what's pulled so much at your heartstrings with that?
Totally. Well, first of all, I love that analogy with the fighter jet. It reminds me of a quote. The ship is safe in its harbor, but that's not where it was meant to be.
Yeah.
Right.
And they actually take the ships away from the harbor when a storm comes.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because it's going to bang up on other ships and whatnot. So the ship is safer out to sea during a storm.
Look at that. The analogy goes further than I thought. So I love that. What hit me? There's this book by Richard Reeves called Of Boys and Men. And he was the first guy to take a real deep dive look at the problems of boys and men. He's of the Brookings Institute, so it's heavily research-based. And he found a lot of macro-level trends amongst men. At a high level, the takeaway is this. Men today, for the first time in history, on average, are doing worse than their grandfathers were in the 1970s. Now, this isn't true for everybody, but if you take a look at across every key metric, this seems to be the case. Let me give you an example. We start in high school. The top 10 percentile of grades, 2/3 of them are female in that top 10 percentile. In the bottom 10 percentile, 2/3 of them are male. What's the graduation rate going on to college? Well, 70% of girls will go on to college, 40% of males now. Similar sort of distribution on the grades in college as we saw in high school, and the similar sort of graduation rates. Now, in 22 of the largest cities in America, women between the ages of 16 and 29 are out earning the boys and the men for the same job and role, right? If you isolate for that. That's not a bad thing. The success of women has no hindrance on the success of men. Life expectancy is increased in both genders. So too can fruition, whether that's financial, career-based, whatever. So what concerns me has nothing to do with the bifurcation between male and female success. It has to do with previous generations of men against current generations of men. And when we see a fall off on, let's just say, wages, men today have 13% lower purchasing power than they did in 1972. There's less men in the workforce today. In 1972, it was 98%. Men either had a job or were looking for one. Today, it's 86%, which is a ginormous decrease. Strength, physical strength. In 1972, grip strength, which is a proxy used for overall strength, was 117 pounds. Today, it's 98 pounds. Men are literally getting weaker. Emotionally, they've never been more isolated. If you were to ask men in the 70s, who would be the first person you'd call if you have a dilemma or trouble or need help at home? They would call their friends 70% of the time. 40% was the parents. That switched. Now it's something like 75%. The first call would be with the parents, and it'd be something like 30% would be to a friend. Why has that switch occurred? Well, it's because more men than ever today are living with their parents. It's actually 43% right now. That's more than the number of men that live with a partner or a spouse, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
We were talking earlier about the deaths of despair, meaning these deaths that come from the suicidal ideation of men, really. If you held the suicide rate constant from the year 2000 to today, it's obviously increased amongst men, but if you had held it constant and not seen that increase, 400,000 more men would be alive in the US today than if we had watched it grow. That's more than the number of men that died in World War II. And that's all just because of suicidal ideation and then the follow through of it, right? So across all of these spectrums, you got mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. That's what I call sort of the inner war of men. Those are real challenges that we all face. And then externally, you've got what I call the external gauntlet. Financial, men are earning less. Social, men have less friends than ever before. Relational, 1 in 3 men in the last year haven't had sex, which is up from 10% in the 1990s.
Man.
Absolutely wild. And then professional, which is when we were talking about men not even wanting to be in the workforce. Across all of these factors, I saw men were declining. That interests me. And I read this and I thought, am I declining? In this book, he delves a little bit further and he says, look, the good news is this. While the bottom 90% of men have never been worse off, the top 10% of men have never been better off. So you've got this change between generations where the 90% are falling off, but the 10% are the best 10% we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do I move myself from the 90% to the 10%? What would I actually need to do? What would I actually need to achieve? Who would I need to be? What kind of friends and relationships would I need to have? It's not just about the outworkings of looking strong and having finances. Who would I need to be as a person, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in order to be in the top 10%? And this is the challenge that I'm facing in trying to define what masculinity means, because that's not an easy answer. And I certainly don't know all those answers, but it's a journey that I'm on to sort of get there. And that's where Project Alpha 8 really stemmed from, answering these 8 challenges and finding the best way to measure where I'm at so that others can measure where they're at.
Amen. Amen.
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Phaeton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com. Matt, everything you just said, I resonate with wholeheartedly, because seeing that top 10% continue to improve, it begs the question, how do I go from the 90 to the 10? It also begs the question of why 90-10, right? Is there a way to be 50-50 or 60-40, right? It's something that I think is very possible and attainable for anyone I talk to. We mentioned before, you could see people operating at a 12 when their potential is a 50. And that might put them in that 90%. But it's like, if you would just pick up your sword or just get out there, you can take yourself from that 12 to that 50. You can take yourself from the 90 to the 10. And if enough people do that, then we change the statistics. You mentioned the 4 internal wars, the 4 external wars. Break more of that down in maybe some tactical approaches, maybe not exactly what to do, but some areas to pay attention to as to where the battlefield actually lies.
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things that men fare particularly poor at is in the emotional area. Men typically suffer from what's called alexithymia, which is the inability to recognize emotions, and typically in ourselves, right? And so we might feel something, but we can't put a finger on what we're feeling. So there's this joke that my mom always used to say when I grew up, which was men have 2 emotions, anger and the other one, right? And for a lot of men, that's true. Anger is the go-to. What I found so interesting about anger and talking with men about this is kind of some key takeaways about it. For example, very few people know that anger is what's known as a secondary emotion, meaning you never feel anger for the sake of anger. You can be happy for the sake of being happy. You can be excited for the sake of being excited. But anger always has a primary emotion underneath it that pushes into anger. For example, you feel guilty, and so you lash out in anger. You feel shame, so you lash out in anger. You're embarrassed. You feel rejected, right? You might feel those, and in order for your psyche to protect you from feeling those feelings, it goes to something it can control, which is anger. So the very first step in order to solve those anger issues in any level, right? Everyone has them. I certainly do.
Yeah.
Is identify what the primary emotion is. And it sounds easy, but it is not. It is very difficult to tell in any given moment whether I'm feeling shame, rejection, fear is a big one. Like someone cuts you off in traffic, you get scared and then you yell at the guy, right? Your girlfriend breaks up with you. You feel rejected. And even though you still love her in that moment, nothing's changed in those 3 seconds, you start insulting her. Where does all that come from? That's your anger protecting your primary emotion, protecting your psyche from feeling the hard feels. One thing that's interesting is the mere act of thinking or saying the emotion you're feeling moves that feelings processing center in your brain from the limbic system, which is a very old part of your brain, to the prefrontal cortex. The reason that's so important is this. Your limbic system, it's reptilian in nature. It's over 200 million years old, whereas our prefrontal cortex, 200,000 years old. This is what distinguished us from animals. It's what allows us to create everything we see in the world today. that is why it's so important to process your emotions here and not there.
Yeah.
And what scientists have found is that the mere act of saying, I feel anger because I feel rejected, transfers the brain activity when they are tracking the electrical impulses from your limbic system to your prefrontal cortex, and allows you to start processing your emotions in what made you the superior animal on earth.
Yeah.
Incredible. So when we're talking about anger, that's a big one right there. And that honestly takes up a lot of men's brain space. How do I overcome anger? I identify the primary emotion that comes from it.
Well, I think it comes from not having the articulation to describe our emotions in the first place, right? I describe it as a Crayola box. It's like men are given two colors, like you mentioned. Here's white for other, here's red for anger. But, you know, you have remember the 64 pack with the sharpener in the back and all that? Yeah. Those were the Crayola boxes I really wanted as a kid. But like, there's so many emotions, and it reminds me of the color wheel. Have you seen the emotion wheel, where it's a wheel with the bigger emotion, the sub emotions of each? We don't have the articulation of what we're feeling, so we default to anger. Because, and I've been guilty of this too. My partner, my wife, what are you feeling? I don't know what I'm feeling, and because I can't articulate it. Now I'm on top of whatever I'm feeling. I'm misunderstood. I'm misunderstood. Now I'm just angry because I'm misunderstood because I don't know what the emotion is. But having a tool like the color wheel allows me to slow down, say, okay, I think I'm angry because something happened, which is rejection. Actually, no, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed because I did something I'm not proud of, and I feel rejected because of the reaction of the people around me. But like you mentioned, that takes effort, that takes time, and it puts it in the processing space in your prefrontal cortex. So then you can learn how to have a relationship with said event.
Sure.
And this is something, I don't know how much research or how much you've looked into trauma, of how many of us hold trauma. And I just look at trauma as it's a promise we made with ourselves, an agreement we made with ourselves because of something that happened, and it now gets programmed into our subconscious. But the problem is, a lot of times the thing happened when we were young, or the thing happened years ago. And because we never downloaded it, put it in our prefrontal cortex, process it, whatever decision we made, whatever promise we made because of that, whether it's something we did or something that's been done to us, we solidify that and we make that promise and we move forward with it. And sure, that might have been helpful for maybe a child of an alcoholic father, or it might have been helpful for surviving a certain time of your life, right? What got you here won't necessarily get you there, though. And if we don't go back, unpack some of these momentous things that have happened to us, we can live our lives committed to promises with ourselves that no longer serve us moving forward. Does that resonate with you in terms of like that trauma and some of the promises we make to ourselves because we're just not adequately equipped to process said emotion or said action at the time? Totally.
I mean, one of the ways that comes out so much is, I find, with youth, and then the things that get embedded in you. For example, people pleasing. I think you had on your pod. Who'd you have on your podcast?
Dr. Robert Glover.
You love this book, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite books. Actually, what started all of this, and it just showed the inception of the nice guy syndrome, how compromising self for others with the hope of getting what you want in the long run is more manipulative than actually being nice. And it's the people pleasing aspect, and how at a young age we're programmed, whether it's a lot of our educators being women to start. My problem was I would fold whenever a girl wanted something. If it was a girl I was interested in, friend zoned right off the bat. Why? Because you want to do things for her. You want to compromise your schedule for her. And that would only end in, Ted, we're just friends. And then now I'm upset with myself because I didn't stick to my guns of the goals that I had for myself. And I didn't get the outcome of the girl that I was trying to get in the first place.
Sure.
Highly manipulative, and not someone with the sense of reality, right? You're not operating in reality. At that point, you're operating more in your own delirium and your hopes of a trade-off. If I do this for you, you'll do this for me. And that's just not the way to live. So that was something that I had to reprogram in myself, of the people pleasing and the compromising, that has now led to me being stern to the point where my wife will credit me on how easily I say no.
Well, one of the interesting things, like at a young age, that Richard Reeves from the Brookings Institute says again, is he says boys are what is kind of colloquially known as orchids in the development psychology world, whereas girls are known as dandelions. The reason they use that analogy, dandelions bloom and thrive in any weather. It could be pouring rain, it can be sunny, and they thrive for the most part. Boys, being the orchids, required the perfect little sunshine. They need everything. They might run out of shade. And if they don't have it, then they tend to suffer. For example, if you take a look, they did a study in Chicago at the bottom 20th percentile in certain neighborhoods of the socioeconomic status band for families. The girls from those neighborhoods had a 71% higher likelihood of going to college than the boys. But if you look at the top 20 percentile of those same neighborhoods, the disparity is 3%. So there's this ginormous gap when you look at maybe socially economically challenged families, but at the higher tiers, there's almost no gap because the environment is enough for the orchids to thrive. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting statistics as well that's come out from all of this is that there are currently more female fighter pilots in the U.S. Air Force than there are male primary school teachers in the U.S. public education system. And you're seeing this falling off of primary school teachers of a male nature in the schools. And as it turns out, this disproportionately affects boys as well. One study found that if you had a male teacher and a female teacher observing classroom on video, the female teacher was much more likely to describe the boys' actions as rambunctious and irritating to the classroom, whereas the male teacher was less likely to do so. Boys rely on role models of a male nature much more than girls rely on role models of a female nature. Now, what this speaks to is the robustness of females. They are strong. They can take it, right? They do not need the environment that boys need. Richard Reeves' question is this, though. What do we need to do at a macro level to ensure that the boys can keep up, frankly, with the girls? Equality has been in place for some time now, and the women have more than caught up. They are doing phenomenal. How do we ensure that the boys are lifted up too? And one of his recommendations is start boys in school a year later. Controversial.
Oh, wow.
I know.
I mean, I don't know if that would necessarily be a bad thing, though.
Might not be. Boys definitely, they have their brain literally develops at a slower rate than girls. So asking them to understand things, that girls do at the same age is literally not fair because of that developmental stage. But should it be required, right? That's the question. Or is it like you have to start a year later, or is it just an option? That's a tricky one, because then you get into like, okay, boys are graduating at 19 now, girls are graduating at 18. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Hard call.
It really is. And I do find when we have generalities, and unfortunately we tend to have black and white policies for millions of shades of gray. That is the world. So I would say maybe there isn't a necessarily right answer, but there are the tweaks and the attempts to facilitate as many as possible.
Sure.
With that thought process, I would also say not just pace, but the way of development, how boys learn, different than how girls learn. And at a young age, more hands-on. And there's a lot of different ways people can learn, not just men and women, boys and girls, but just people in general. I don't know if there's 7 different ways or whatnot, but like there's a lot of different ways that people can learn, and a lot of different areas of genius that people have, whether it's genius musically, or someone who's pitch perfect, or more of a genius with mathematics, more of a genius when it comes to storytelling and concepts. And one of my gifts is big patterns and simplifying them, hence me being a meteorologist. So there's so many nuances that I feel are so specific, and we can't necessarily touch each and every single one personally, which is why I always lean towards personal agency. I can't control the systems in which I was born in, exposed to, and me being an orchid. Yes, I know to a certain degree there's only enough I can do as a child. But there is a point where we don't have to grow where we were planted. And it might be a little harsh, but I give the age 25. I say at 25, you've passed you've been 18 for long enough. You've had enough legal independence to take control of your life if you're not happy with it, right?
Totally.
And you can start making that change, which is why going back to for the men that are listening, I mean, our demographic 25 to 55, they're at that level. So I'm looking right at the camera like, guys, you don't have to grow where you're planted, right? But I also want to encourage them that you have the ability to move and go somewhere else. You have the ability to take ownership of your life and cultivate these skills and create something out of nothing. Which I also think is a beautiful thing about men.
It is. And that's the paradox of what you might call a victim mentality too. If you want a victim mentality, meaning you blame your circumstances on something other than you, which might be fair in some cases, then you don't get to take credit when things go well. Because if you're blaming the bad stuff on somebody else, why does it stop when it becomes the good stuff? So it's an all or nothing thing. You either say, I'm going to take responsibility and say bad things may have happened. It happens. And life is not fair and it sucks. And maybe you have every reason in the world to shake a fist at God. But what happens now? You shook your fist. You're angry. You're mad. What next? What's tomorrow going to look like? What's the next day going to look like? If it looks bad, do you blame yourself? Do you blame the world? If it looks good, do you blame yourself or the world? You have to choose one. You don't get to say the bad stuff was the world's fault, the good stuff's my fault, right? You have to choose one of them. And that is the paradox there. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Agency is so important. At what age? I don't know. 25 sounds good to me though.
Yeah. Well, and I lean into that because, Kirk, I'm at a point in my life and I imagine you lived an amazing life so far. And I'm excited to see what you continue to do, because just researching you traveling the world, building businesses, and now doing these endurance challenges, you're upping the ante in what's possible, what Kirk is capable of. And the one thing I do like is we do have the ability to craft who we become. And it never really solidified for me until recently. Right. I've been on my journey and this whole mental health. I read that book, No More Mr. Nice Guy by Dr. Robert Glover, over 10 years ago. And that's what started the lack of compromise. I mean, I'm not a hard ass. I still meet people where they're at, but that's what started with have your goals, be ambitious, work on yourself. And as I've set certain goals for me. And the crazy thing is I'm starting to look around and they're happening. They're coming together. And when something like that happens, I don't have a mountaintop. I'm not on Kilimanjaro. I got to follow your footsteps and climb that. But I would scream it there. And as I'm screaming on the podcast, it's like, you have the power to take control of your life. And for me, it started with fitness. It started with the gym. We talk about workouts being the gateway drug to self-improvement. And when it comes to endurance training, another study in 2020 on mental toughness and stress, it found that endurance athletes develop higher stress tolerance and emotional regulation compared to non-athletes. Long duration physical challenges like high rocks or mountaineering enhances resilience and cognitive flexibility. Yeah. So bringing this full circle here, it's how we live our lives also preps us for how we react to what life brings us. And when reading up on everything you've done, I'm seeing that expression, the expression of embracing challenges, climbing mountains, participating in high rocks race, finding community. We met through the Brotherhood of Manly, which is all the things that in essence echo into being in that top 10%. I'd love for you to share more, because I know you referenced the 4 internals, 4 externals, the book you're writing. What has those discoveries led you to believe and how you act today?
I mean, I can tell you this much. The single most impactful, let's say call it research project in writing this book was the section on spirituality. And spirituality is a tricky thing because how do you define something that's spiritual? Where does the emotional end and the spiritual start, or the mental begin and the spiritual end? It's very tricky in that sense. So what I isolated spirituality to, the spiritual section, was purpose. The main reason men are committing suicide at these rates, self-described, if they fail to commit suicide and they're asked, why did you do it? They said, I felt purposeless and I felt useless. And traditionally, men have had this protector, provider, procreator role. But in the West, at least in the world, protector has become less needed. We have the police force, right? We don't have tigers running around all the time trying to eat us, right? For the most part, protection is not as needed as it used to be. Provider, well, as I mentioned before, women are making just as much, if not more than men. And that's only going to increase because in every OECD country in the world, women are outnumbering men in the number of bachelor's degrees they hold. And those are typically the high paying jobs. So provider is not as much needed, and procreator, self-explanatory, but science kind of says that theoretically, if all men disappeared, they could still find a way to make people, right? So the traditional role has disappeared, and that's leaving men confused. So writing this spirituality section was super interesting to me because I'm like, how do we fill this void of protector, provider, procreator with this hypothetical new purpose? So I went back to the greats, and maybe greats, maybe not so much great, who knows, depending on what you think. But Nietzsche, Freud, and then a lesser known figure, Viktor Frankl. These were pioneers in thinking not only about purpose, but I mean, Freud invented therapy, like talk therapy. Some say he was a nut. Some say that he was a genius. He was probably somewhere in between, like most geniuses are. Yeah. But they all said something different about how you achieve purpose. Freud said that purpose was pleasure. He defined this term called the Lustprinzip, which is a German word meaning the pleasure principle. And he said, look, at our core, we are beholden to our pleasures, a hedonistic lifestyle. You can't really escape it. And a lot of crazy theories came from that. But at a certain level, he was right. We need to be able to look after ourselves first. This is a very immature view, but we expect that of children. We want the kid to learn how to look after themselves, right? And just think about themselves and feed themselves because we want them to learn to survive. And then Nietzsche came in and he talked about, he wrote a book called Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he spoke about what he called the Übermensch. And it was a confusing figure, but the Übermensch was essentially a person that overcame himself. All of his pre-existing ideas that society had put into him, he overcame them to form his own ideas. And each person was meant to do that for themselves and come their own ideas. So it was this idea of growth. You were going to be better tomorrow than you are today, which is certainly more noble than the hedonistic Lustprinzip, but it still only focuses on the self. You've got the Lustprinzip from Freud, which said it's all about me. You have the Übermensch, which says it's overcoming myself. But then you had Viktor Frankl, and he's a very interesting figure because he studied both of those men and then was put into an intern camp at Auschwitz during World War II. And so what did he rely on when he was in these camps? Did he look to Freud? Did he look to Nietzsche? He actually developed his own theory, combining somewhat of the two, where he said that purpose was defined by responsibility. There were a couple pieces in there, but he said at its core, if you want more purpose in your life, take on more responsibility. And in this world today, we're seeing the male marriage rate reach all-time highs, meaning the age at which they get married, not increasing marriage, meaning they get married older. They want to have kids later. Some of them don't want to have kids at all. Why would I want to have those things that interfere with my life? I want to do what I want to do. I want to go out and be adventurous. But really, these things, these responsibilities are in my way. That mind shift, in my opinion, and I certainly was the biggest culprit of that in the world. I traveled the world for 2 years and pushed off all sorts of responsibility. It was in writing this where I realized I need to pull back on this sporadic, happy-goes-lucky guy and push into responsibility if what I truly want is purpose. And then you meet a girl that you want to spend your life with. And then you have kids and all of these things that you thought were obstacles begin to give you the purpose that you were so seeking. Changed my whole world. And so what I now tell men is this: if you are feeling purposeless, go out and add responsibility to your life. Jordan Peterson echoed what Frankl said. And he said, your purpose in life is to find the biggest burden that you can bear and bear it. And a man who can look after himself is responsible. A man who can look after two people is more responsible still. A family more responsible still. His extended family more. That is the purpose that I think men should be striving for. Become the godfather of your own family, right? You know, that incredible movie, The Godfather, where he's overlooking his whole family and everybody. That is what men should strive for, right? Leave the crime aside, but the community of that family, unbeatable.
Amazing. Amazing.
Sorry to interrupt, guys. Ted Phaeton here. And if you're like me, then your day is planned up to the minute. You see, between work, working out, being present for my family, navigating 2 podcasts, and trying to scale my business, I don't have time to focus on what I'm going to be eating throughout the day. They're called Nutri meals. They're delivered right to my front door. All my meals are set for the week, and it fits my macros and provides me with the fuel I need to keep up with my training as I get ready for my upcoming High Rocks race. If you're busy and you're juggling and trying to navigate keeping up with training, work, and being present for your family, then I encourage you to take one thing off of your plate. That could be your nutrition. Check out Nutri meals and get 40% off when you use code ModernMan. Try out the meals yourself and let me know what you think.
Man, so everything you just described, have you ever heard of the amazing development of men?
No.
Allison A. Armstrong. I had her on the podcast as well, and I loved the description that she gave. It's somewhat why I talk about the Noble Knights. But she talks about young boys being pages, and through their adolescence into their 20s, they become knights. And then after a knight, they become a prince. And you can kind of see the development here. And after the prince, they become a king. And then I even added it to an emperor. And the way I see that development, similar to what you expressed, is, you know, as a page, you're looking up to other men. I think a lot of boys will model other men, whether they like it or not. It's just how we are wired. We're going to identify with someone we relate to and follow because we want what they want.
Sure.
That's the page stage. Then the knight stage is, like you mentioned, I'm adventurous. I'm out in the world. I'm exploring the world. I'm probably getting into some trouble. I'm doing a lot of different things, right? That's the knight stage. But then the knight transitions into the prince when he starts to realize, oh, snap, I'm going to have to take over a kingdom at some point. Maybe I should start buttoning up and start taking on more responsibility. Maybe it's the career, they're moving up in the world. And then that king stage usually comes when they've worked hard at a career. Then they get that whole midlife crisis. Like, what is this for? Am I on the right path? Did I climb up the wrong ladder? Right? And then they settle into their comfort and their confidence as a grown man being that knight.
I love it.
The added level that I added was emperor, where it's like, okay, or being that king rather. After a king, where you take care of your home, your household, those around you, you could expand that into your church, your community, and even more, which becomes the empire. Wow. Now, I'm not saying this as an authoritarian hand over the empire. You call the shots, but what an amazing feeling it must be to be able to take care of others, to be reliable for others, to get the satisfaction of providing, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint, or just from a spiritual standpoint, or being able to sit with somebody else through the storm without being bothered. What I also find, though, unfortunately, is in that growth and in that process, sometimes men overextend themselves, taking on more responsibility than they're prepared for. It's something I could say experiencing in my 10K. I've been training for it. Pushed a little hard. I hit my goals, but my body was talking to me for about a week and a half. Like, hey, bro, we weren't ready for that. But that's where the rest and recovery came into play. But I would love for you to just speak on really quick that expansion, because what a beautiful picture and what a beautiful thought of that purpose of responsibility. However, I also want to caution overfilling your plate with that responsibility to where you feel overwhelmed? Because I do think a lot of guys listening go from 0 to 100, and that's not always the best route.
100%. I mean, for those in the CrossFit community, they'd know who Matt Fraser is. He's one of the best. He's the best CrossFitter that ever lives from a male perspective, beaten only by Tia Toomey. Shout out to Australia for just absolutely crushing the female sphere. One of the things he said is that for guys that friends of his that he wanted to get into working out, or they asked him, how can I get more into working out? He'd bring them over to their gym and he'd walk them through maybe a 20-minute EMOM or 20-minute Metcon or something like that. And they'd say, okay, cool, what's next? Because they know it's Matt Fraser. He's going to push me. He's going to kill me, everything. And he goes, nothing. You go home. Don't change anything about your diet. Don't change anything about, you've done your little bit, then come back to more and we'll do 25 minutes. And then the next day we'll do 30 minutes. And you add bit by bit. Going hardcore into a course like 75 hard when you have never done, a physical challenge like that before, or not training for Kilimanjaro and then going at Kilimanjaro, that's probably not a good move. Add things incrementally. I like to say this, the mental challenge of men is the two voices competing in your mind. I talked about them before. The limbic system, the prefrontal cortex. One of them tells you, eat the cake. One of them says, eat some celery, right? One of them says, sit on the couch. The other one says, go to the gym. That battle in our mind, we have that every single day about 1,000 times. And the crazy part about it is that we already know the answer. When I get home from work and I know I should go to the gym because my prefrontal cortex is telling me, you want this for yourself. It's better for you. But my limbic system is saying, sit on the couch and eat your ice cream, right? I already know what the right answer is. The right answer is go to the gym. I'm just trying to find the willpower in myself to get there. This is how you start winning those battles more often. You make 3 promises to yourself and you say, I'm going to follow these 3 promises no matter what. For example, I'm going to wake up every single day at 6 a.m. and with my cup of coffee, that's promise number 1. And with my cup of coffee, I'm going to read 10 pages of a book that is going to make me better. And then number 3 is I'm going to do 20 push-ups, right? Something like that. It doesn't have to be those 3, but something that you will not break because you need to learn how to stick to promises to yourself. And the moment you can stick to 3, maybe one day you like them and then you can make 3 more and you can add a 4th, you can add a 5th, right? So expansion starts very small. It starts by the 1% gains. 1% better every single day is a 30% gain over your entire year. That means you increase yourself by over 1/3 every year by just making yourself incrementally better every single day.
Yeah. And that power of exponential growth is surreal.
So real.
And it's all about being in it long enough to see the exponential growth, because I saw it in my portfolio. I'm talking to a finance guy. You already know. It's like, I'm saving money. I'm like, is this really working in my 20s? And like 401k, Roth IRA. And like now I'm just like, oh, snap. Like, let's go. I'm so thankful for what I did 10 plus years ago.
Totally.
Because the impacts of that still ripple into today. And from what I'm gathering, that's the same when it comes to your growth. That's the same when it comes to your expansion. And even further, who we hope to become starts with the steps that we take. I know the Chinese proverb that the journey of 10,000 miles starts with 1 step.
Sure.
And it's all about taking that step today. I know you started a YouTube channel and you're sharing a lot of the research and a lot of the findings that you've had with folks coming to your channel and whatnot. I want to make sure anyone watching can follow you, like you, subscribe, and get in touch with you. What are some of the best links and destinations?
Definitely. YouTube channel is a good one. This whole project that I'm working on of solving the 8 challenges of men or how to address them is called Project Alpha 8. You can go to projectalpha8.com and learn more about it there. What's coming from that is a framework by which men can evaluate themselves at each of the challenges. It's just a self-evaluation. It's not public or anything. Just where am I sitting relative to the rest of men, the rest of society? Where do I need to improve? And it's always interesting what comes out of it. Areas you think you're doing really well at, you might not be, but the goal at the end of the day is to be balanced across all 8. You don't want to be the guy on Wall Street with $1 billion that can't lift a 5-pound kettlebell and is going to die at 55 due to his heart strength. But you don't want the reverse where you're some gym bro that doesn't have 2 cents to rub together. And you also don't want all of those things and have no friends or no family, right? Having a balance between them is ultimately the goal. And the studies show that a balance across a variety of successes in your life is what leads to the most joy. I won't even call it happiness. I'll call it joy, because even in the sad times, you can still have your joy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been incredible chatting with you.
Yeah, absolutely, Kirk. And I do have one more question. I save it for last. It's usually the heaviest. So something tells me you're going to have no problem answering it. What's something that you've seen or something that's happened to you that shapes the way you view the world as a man?
Seeing how much wrong I could do and still having people in my life that will love me makes me want to be that for others. That no matter how dark a place we go, we can still be pulled out of it.
Mm.
And for me, and maybe this is for podcast number 2, I went to places where I didn't talk with my family. All of the things that I stand for now, I abandoned all of them. And at the end of all of that, my family still were there for me and reached out. And my friends who had no reason to take me back took me back. And that sort of what you might call unconditional love, undeserved love, that makes me want to do the rest of it so that other people can experience the same grace that I experienced.
Amen. And that's exactly what I wrote in my notes was grace. I love it.
Good.
High-performing athlete, finance professional, men's advocate, redefining what it means to compete both in sports and in life. Kirk Kappelhof, thank you so much for being on, brother.
Thanks for having me, Ted. It was amazing, brother.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you guys for making it to the end. I'm going to rattle off some of the gems that Kirk left along the way, because I know a lot of you guys are driving, cleaning, working out while listening. Still your set, by the way. Finish that set. I got you. I took the notes for you. AMCC, part of the brain that grows and shrinks with willpower. The crazy thing about it is as you do harder things, your AMCC grows, helps reduce your risk of anxiety, depression. But here's the other half. The moment that challenge becomes fun, the AMCC stops growing. So what varieties are you throwing into not just your workouts, but into your life to make sure that you're continually challenging yourself and expanding yourself? Something we're going to get back to here in just a little bit. Why not just give it your best shot? There's something that you're dipping your toe in. There's something that you're spinning around the drain in. Just go in, bro. Give it your best shot, whether it's that challenge of climbing the mountain, that challenge of the endurance race, or even that challenge of starting that business that you're afraid to start. Give it your best shot. What's the worst that could happen? Because you're more likely to ask on your deathbed, why did I not do it? Than why did I do it? Who would I need to be in order to be in the top 10%? You have the power, you have the agency, and you have the utilities in order to change your reality. Believe that. If you find yourself in the bottom 90%, you can change and become top 10%. And enough of you guys watching do this. It's not 90-10 anymore. It could be 80-20, shoot 50-50, or 90-10 in the opposite direction. Wouldn't that be something? Ladies would enjoy that. They'd have more to pick from. Do you recognize your emotion, or do you default right to anger? Download the color wheel. I could put the link in the show notes if you'd like, but learn how to identify the emotions that you're dealing with so you don't default to the secondary emotion, which is anger. And what is your purpose? What is the reason for the pain that you're going through, the suffering that you're enduring? What is on the other end? What is it that you want? And what are you doing it for? Add things incrementally so you can take on that responsibility, because I can tell you as a father, as a husband, my goal in life is to be the man that my wife and my child deserves. It fills me up to see the smiles on their face from the work that I do, and I will put up with a lot of pain and a lot of suffering for my family. If you think I was motivated before, y'all don't know me now. And make 3 promises to yourself for that incremental growth. It doesn't have to be major, it doesn't have to be big. Just add them little by little. And no matter how bad, where you go, there's grace. Show it to others, and you can receive it yourself. Guys, thank you so much for making it to the end. As always, make sure you hit that like button. hit that subscribe button to get a new episode each and every single week. Give my man Kirk a follow and leave us a rating to let us know how we're doing. I'm going to come find you if you don't. It's the best compliment that you can give us, and share this podcast to keep this value going. As we say at the end, each and every single time, everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.